Welcome to my channel. Please support by subscribing, liking, and sharing. Thank you. The fog rolled in heavy that morning, thick, pale, and endless. It swallowed the sleepy town of Willow Creek like a memory that refused to fade. From the porch, Claire Monroe could barely see the curve of the road where the pines bent low, whispering against the damp air. It was the kind of morning where everything felt paused, where hearts listened louder than words. She wrapped her cardigan tighter, watching the mist curl around her boots. Her uncle's old farmhouse stood quiet behind her, the same one where summers once meant laughter, lemonade, and stories around the fire. But this year, everything was different. Her uncle had fallen sick, and with him gone to stay in a care home in Portland, the house felt both familiar and strange, empty, yet filled with echoes. And then there was Evan Hale. He'd been her uncle's closest friend, a man of few words, with calm eyes and hands that spoke of decades of work and patience. A carpenter, a widower, and the kind of man who moved through life quietly but firmly, like the foundation of a home no one noticed until they leaned on it. He'd been helping her fix up the old house before it sold. Claire had returned from Chicago, hoping to stay for just a few weeks, but the way life turns, it rarely asks for permission. That morning, she heard his truck engine before she saw him. The low hum cut through the fog, steady and familiar. She didn't know why her heart skipped, but it did, like it recognized something her mind wasn't ready to name. Evan stepped out. Jacket zipped, gloves on, his hair brushed with early gray. He looked like the fog itself had shaped him, quiet, strong, and a little lonely. "Morning," he said, voice low and warm. "Morning," Claire replied, forcing a smile. "I wasn't sure you'd come in this weather." He shrugged slightly. "Fog never stopped me before." Then his eyes met hers, lingering for a second longer than usual. Something passed between them, something unspoken, something that neither of them would ever admit had been building for weeks. They walked toward the barn, tools in hand. The fog followed. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of sawdust and old hay. Evan started working on the staircase, and Claire handed him the sandpaper, pretending not to notice the way his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms lined with faint scars. She'd always seen him as dependable, her uncle's right-hand man, but lately, he felt different. Or maybe she did. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. He looked up, confused. "Miss what?" "Being part of something. Not just fixing things for others, but building for yourself again." Evan paused. The sound of sandpaper slowed. "I guess I stopped thinking about that a long time ago." Claire nodded, eyes dropping. She didn't know why she asked. Maybe because she knew what that kind of emptiness felt like. Chicago had been full of people, lights, and noise, yet she'd never felt lonelier. Coming back here wasn't just about family. It was about trying to remember who she was before the city drained her spark. When she looked up again, Evan was watching her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that made her seen. It startled her. "I used to think the fog made things harder to see," he said softly, "but maybe it just helps us focus on what's close." The words lingered. The rest of the day moved slowly. They talked about small things, the price of lumber, her uncle's stories, her dreams of maybe writing again, but beneath every sentence was that quiet tension. The kind that hums between two people who pretend not to notice how close they're standing. By afternoon, the fog hadn't lifted. The sun tried to break through but failed, leaving everything tinted silver. When Evan packed his tools, Claire offered him coffee before he left. "Just stay a while," she said without thinking. He hesitated, just long enough to make her wonder if she'd said too much. Then he nodded. Inside the kitchen, the world felt smaller. The ticking clock, the faint smell of pine from his jacket, the steam from the coffee cups. They sat at the table, both pretending to be casual, both failing. "You've done a lot here," he said, glancing around. "Your uncle would be proud." She smiled faintly. "He always said this place had a heart. I guess I'm trying to keep it beating." Their eyes met again, this time, softer, more fragile. Something about the fog pressing against the windows made the moment feel suspended, like they were hidden from the rest of the world. He reached across the table, not to touch her, but to steady the photo frame that had started to tilt. His hand brushed hers, just barely, and yet the silence that followed carried more meaning than words ever could. Claire's breath caught. The warmth of that small touch traveled deeper than she expected. She looked down quickly, her pulse unsteady. Evan drew his hand back, his expression unreadable. "I should probably go before it gets worse out there," he said quietly, nodding toward the fog. But neither of them moved. The fog pressed tighter, the clock ticked louder, and the house, so old and full of memories, seemed to hold its breath with them. Something had shifted, subtle, but real, like the first ripple in still water. He finally stood, his chair scraping softly against the floor. "Tomorrow, I'll finish the stairs," he said, voice steady but softer now. "Okay," she whispered, as the door closed behind him. Claire pressed her hands together, trying to make sense of the feeling that lingered. She knew what it was, that quiet ache of connection you can't explain. The kind that comes when two souls recognize something they shouldn't, but can't ignore. Outside, the fog swallowed Evan's figure as he walked to his truck, and in that silence, Claire knew the morning hadn't just been foggy. It had changed everything. The fog lingered the next morning, as if it, too, had unfinished business at Willow Creek. Claire woke early, the house still wrapped in silence. Every board creaked softly under her feet as she made her way to the kitchen. She brewed coffee, but her mind wasn't on the cup, it was on Evan Hale. She didn't know what unsettled her more, the way his hand had brushed hers, or the fact that she couldn't stop replaying it. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. But then again, why did her chest feel tight every time she thought about it? Outside, the air was still thick, though the fog had thinned enough for her to see the old maple by the fence. A few leaves had started to turn. Autumn was creeping closer, quiet but certain. She pulled her cardigan tighter, as if it could hold back the change that seemed to be happening inside her. When she heard the crunch of gravel, she knew it was him. The sound sent a nervous flutter through her chest. Evan's truck came into view, headlights dim in the mist. He stepped out, the same calm, deliberate way he always did, jacket zipped, tool belt slung over his shoulder. But today, when his eyes met hers, there was something new, a faint hesitation, as if the air between them remembered too much. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied, his voice low, careful. "Didn't think the fog would stick around this long. Seems like it doesn't want to leave." They stood there for a moment, neither moving, both pretending they didn't feel the strange quiet pulling at them. Then, as if remembering why he was there, Evan looked toward the house. "Let's finish those stairs," he said. The barn had always been her favorite place, warm, filled with light that filtered through dusty windows, and scented faintly with cedar and hay. But today it felt smaller, closer, like every sound, the scrape of wood, the rasp of sandpaper, carried a pulse. Claire worked beside him, handing tools, sweeping sawdust, doing her best to stay focused. Yet every time their hands brushed or their eyes met, the silence grew heavier. At one point, she caught him looking, not at her, but at the photo of her uncle pinned to the post near the workbench. "He used to sit right there," Evan said quietly, nodding toward the stool. "He'd tell me about his sister's little girl who was always reading by the porch light. Said you'd grow up to do something that mattered." Claire smiled faintly. "I don't know if I've done much of that yet." "You came back," he said simply. "That counts." The warmth in his tone disarmed her. She wasn't used to words like that, honest, simple, without trying to impress. In Chicago, everyone spoke fast, chasing deadlines and dreams. Here, with Evan, time felt slower, real. "You ever wish you'd left?" she asked. He paused, leaning against the railing he was sanding. "Maybe once, but I learned something out here. Leaving doesn't always mean living. Sometimes staying teaches you more." Claire looked at him, the fog light softening the lines on his face. There was strength there. Yes, but also a tenderness she hadn't noticed before. They worked in silence for a while after that, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, it was full of thoughts neither of them dared to speak. By noon, they'd finished the last step. Evan tested it with his boot, nodding in quiet approval. "Solid," he said. "Your uncle would have liked that." She smiled, brushing dust from her hands. "You make it look easy." He shook his head slightly. "It's not easy. You just learn to listen to the wood, know what it needs." There it was again, that simple wisdom that made her chest tighten. She followed him outside, watching as he loaded tools into his truck. The fog was finally lifting, revealing the stretch of road that curved down toward the lake. The air felt clearer, but her thoughts didn't. "Evan," she said softly. He turned, meeting her gaze. "Why do you still come here?" Even after she hesitated. "After my uncle left for Portland." He studied her for a moment, his eyes steady. "Because he asked me to make sure you'd be okay here." Claire's lips parted slightly. "He did." Evan nodded. "He said you'd pretend you didn't need help, but you'd need someone who understood this place. Someone who'd keep it standing until you were ready to decide what to do next." Her throat tightened. "That sounds like him." Evan gave a faint smile. "He was proud of you, you know." The wind shifted then, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Claire felt her eyes sting, and she turned away, blinking it back. I miss him, she whispered. I know, Evan said. He was like a brother to me. Their eyes met again, and something in the way he said it made her heart ache. It wasn't just grief she saw in his eyes. It was understanding. A reflection of her own loneliness. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then a light drizzle began to fall. Soft and cold. Come inside, she said instinctively. You'll catch cold. He hesitated again, but followed. Inside, the air felt warm and safe. She handed him a towel, and he wiped his hands, his movements slow. Almost thoughtful. Do you ever get tired of being the strong one? She asked suddenly. He looked at her, caught off guard. What do you mean? You're always fixing, helping, holding things together. Doesn't it ever get heavy? He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held a trace of pain. It does, but some things are worth holding, even when they're heavy. The words lingered. Claire swallowed hard. You really believe that? I do, he said. I think strength isn't about not breaking. It's about staying soft, even when the world makes it hard to. Her breath caught. He looked down then, as if realizing how much he'd said. The clock ticked softly. The rain grew steadier, and in that quiet, something inside Claire shifted again, not loudly, but deeply. When he finally stood to leave, she followed him to the door. The drizzle had turned to mist again, the fog returning like an unfinished thought. Thank you, she said, for all of this. He nodded. You don't need to thank me. Just promise you won't forget what this place feels like. She smiled faintly. I won't. Evan's gaze lingered, just a second too long. Then he turned and walked toward his truck, his footsteps fading into the soft rain. Claire stood at the door long after he left, her hand resting on the old frame of the staircase they'd finished together. It felt solid, strong, but it also felt like a beginning she hadn't expected. Outside, the fog crept back across the fields, swallowing the road, as if reminding her that some stories unfold slowly, one quiet heartbeat at a time. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, but the fog returned, gentler now, brushing against the windows like a soft memory. Claire sat by the kitchen table, her laptop open but untouched. The blinking cursor on the blank document seemed to mock her silence. She was supposed to be writing stories, essays, something that would remind her she was still the woman she had once dreamed of becoming. But her thoughts kept wandering back to Evan Hale. Every sound from the old farmhouse reminded her of him, the creak of the steps they had built together, the faint scent of cedar that still clung to her hands. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. He was her uncle's friend, a man she had known all her life. He'd always been just a quiet presence in family gatherings, the one who fixed the fence, drove her aunt to appointments, and never spoke unless there was something worth saying. Yet now, when she thought of him, her heart carried a strange rhythm, one that pulsed with warmth and confusion. Outside, the morning light filtered through the fog, turning the yard silver. She needed a distraction, anything to stop her thoughts from circling back to the same place. So, she climbed the attic stairs, a space she hadn't entered since her uncle's illness began. The air was cold and smelled of cedar and dust. Boxes were stacked neatly, labeled in her uncle's tidy handwriting. Tools, winter clothes, letters. She ran her fingers across the cardboard, brushing off a thin film of dust. One box caught her attention, tucked behind an old chest, marked simply, for Claire. Her heart skipped. She knelt and opened it. Inside were old photographs, postcards from the 1970s, and a bundle of letters tied with a frayed blue ribbon. On top was a note in her uncle's handwriting. If you're reading this, Claire, it means you came home. Her throat tightened as she unfolded it. I've kept things here that belong to our family's story, pieces of who we were and what we learned. Don't sell this place until you've looked through them. There's more to this house than wood and nails. It's built from love, loss, and second chances. You'll understand soon enough. The letter trembled slightly in her hands. She reached for the rest of the bundle. Most were written to her uncle from her late aunt, from friends who'd moved away. And one, surprisingly, from Evan Hale. Her breath caught. The envelope was dated 15 years ago. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, familiar. She hesitated, then opened it. Tom, you've always been like a brother to me. I never thanked you enough for letting me be part of your family. When Mary died, I thought I'd lost everything. You and this place kept me breathing. You once said love doesn't die, it just changes shape. Maybe you were right. I think I see that now, even if it hurts. Thank you for reminding me that good hearts still exist. The words were simple, but they carried an ache, quiet, deep, and unspoken. Claire sat back, the letter trembling in her fingers. She wondered what pain he had carried all these years, working alone, keeping his heart buried in sawdust and silence. A soft sound behind her made her jump. "Didn't mean to scare you," Evan's voice said gently. She turned. He stood at the top of the attic stairs, holding a toolbox. His jacket was damp from the morning mist, and his eyes flicked from her to the open box at her feet. "You found it," he said quietly. "You knew about this." He nodded. "Your uncle asked me to make sure it stayed safe. He said one day you'd need what's inside." Claire held up the letter. "Did you mean what you wrote?" Evan looked away, his jaw tightening. Every word. The attic felt smaller suddenly, the air thick with old dust and something more fragile, truth. She studied him, the man who had been a constant presence in her family's story yet somehow remained a mystery. "You lost her young, didn't you?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Mary was everything good I ever knew. She got sick fast. After that, I just worked. It was easier than feeling." Claire's eyes softened. "You helped my uncle through his own storms. You gave everyone strength, Evan. But who gave it to you?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to the old floorboards. "Sometimes you stop expecting anyone to." The quiet stretched. Outside, a crow called somewhere in the fog. Claire set the letters aside and stood. "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore," she said, her voice low but steady. "You've done enough for everyone else." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. The wall he'd kept around his heart seemed to tremble. "Claire," he said softly, "some things you just live with." She stepped closer. "Or you let someone live them with you." For a moment, their eyes locked, and the air between them pulsed with an ache neither could ignore. But before either could speak again, a sudden sound startled them, a photograph slipping from the box and fluttering to the floor. They both bent to pick it up. Their hands brushed again. That same electric stillness. The picture was of her uncle Evan and a much younger Claire, barely 10. Smiling on the porch. "He always said you were the light of this house," Evan murmured. Claire swallowed hard. "Then why does it feel like the light went out?" "Because you forgot it's still inside you," he said simply. The words hit deeper than he probably meant them to. She blinked away the tears that gathered, then smiled faintly. "You talk like you build people, the same way you build wood." Evan chuckled softly, a sound that warmed the cold attic. "Maybe I do. Both break if you don't listen." They stayed there for a while, sorting through the letters and photos. Every piece told a story of loss, resilience, love that had stretched across years. By the time they finished, the fog outside had thinned, and golden light filtered through the attic window. Evan stood, brushing dust from his hands. "Your uncle wanted you to read these before you made any big decisions about selling the place." Claire looked around, the sunlight dancing across the beams. "I don't think I can sell it. Not yet." He smiled slightly. "I thought you'd say that." As he turned to leave, she stopped him. "Evan, thank you for everything, for not giving up on this place, or me." He met her eyes again, that same quiet warmth there. "You were never something to give up on." The words lingered long after he left. Claire stood by the window, watching him walk down the path. The mist parting around him like the world itself was making room for something new. She looked down at the last letter in her hands, one she hadn't opened yet. It was addressed to her, written in her uncle's familiar handwriting. "Claire, if you've found this, then you've already seen what love can survive. Don't be afraid of the past. Sometimes, what feels like the end is just the start of another story. Trust your heart, even if it leads you somewhere unexpected." Her heart raced as she read it again, the words glowing in the soft light. Somewhere unexpected. And for the first time since coming home, she felt it, a quiet stirring. A sense that maybe life was not about returning to who you were, but becoming who you were meant to be. Outside, the fog lifted completely, revealing the lake glistening in the distance. And down the road, Evan's truck disappeared around the bend, carrying with it the echo of something that felt like hope. The sun had returned to Willow Creek after nearly a week of gray mornings. For the first time in days, the world looked awake, gold light dancing on the pines, the lake shimmering like polished glass. The fog had lifted, but for Claire Monroe, something heavier still lingered inside. Evan hadn't been back since the day in the attic, she told herself. He was just busy, that the repairs were done, that there was no reason for him to return. But that didn't quiet the ache she felt when she passed the stairs they'd built together, or when she caught the faint scent of pine and sawdust in the kitchen where he'd once stood. She tried to write again, but her heart was elsewhere. Every word she typed felt hollow. The truth was, Evan's silence had left a space in her days she didn't know how to fill. Then, late that afternoon, she found the note. It was slipped beneath her front door, written in Evan's familiar handwriting. Claire, I'm at the lake house, finishing some work your uncle started years ago. If you'd like to see it before it's gone, come before sundown. Her pulse quickened. The lake house, the small cabin her uncle had started building for her aunt before she passed away. No one had set foot there in years. She hadn't even known Evan had been working on it. Without thinking, she grabbed her jacket and keys. The drive was short but winding, the trees arching above like a green tunnel, their leaves glowing gold in the late light. The air smelled of rain and cedar, the scent of home. When she arrived, the lake reflected the sunset in waves of copper and rose. The cabin stood quietly by the water's edge, smaller than she remembered, but alive in a way it had never been before. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney. Evan was there, stacking wood by the porch. When he looked up, surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by something softer. "You came," he said simply. "You asked," she replied, smiling faintly. He nodded toward the cabin. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see it. Your uncle and I started this before your aunt got sick. He couldn't finish it after she passed, so I've been doing it piece by piece." Claire stepped inside, and her breath caught. The cabin was beautiful, warm. Wooden beams glowed under the light of the fireplace. The air carried the faint scent of varnish and smoke. On the walls hung photographs her aunt, her uncle, even a few of Claire as a child, playing by the water. "It's like time stopped here," she whispered. Evan smiled faintly. He wanted it to feel that way. Said this place should remind you that love doesn't die, it just changes homes. Her eyes softened. "He told me that once too." For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly. Evan busied himself with the kettle on the stove, pouring water into 2 mugs. He handed her one, and she smiled as she wrapped her hands around it. "Tea," she teased. "I thought you'd be a coffee man." He chuckled, a low, warm sound. "After a long day, coffee keeps me up thinking. Tea lets me stop." They sat near the fire, both quiet. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was full, alive, threaded with something that felt like peace and longing all at once. "I read the last letter," Claire said suddenly. Evan looked at her. "Your uncle's?" She nodded. "He told me not to be afraid of unexpected paths. I think he knew I'd find something here I wasn't looking for." He studied her for a moment. "And did you—" Claire's heart thudded. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I think I'm starting to." He nodded, his gaze steady. The firelight painted his face in golden shadow, softening the edges of his expression. "Your uncle always said you'd grow into your own kind of courage." She smiled faintly. "I'm still looking for it." "You've already found it," he said. "You came back. You faced the ghosts in this house. Most people run from their past. You chose to understand it." His words struck something deep. Claire looked at him, really looked, and realized how much she admired his quiet strength, how his silence wasn't emptiness, but depth thought outside. The wind brushed through the pines, carrying the sound of the lake lapping against the shore. "Do you ever think about starting over?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window toward the water. "I used to think I was too old for that," he said finally, "too set in my ways. But lately," he trailed off, his eyes distant. "Lately, what?" He exhaled slowly. "Lately, I've been thinking maybe I was wrong." Their eyes met again, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. Claire set her cup down gently. "You said once that strength is about staying soft, even when life makes it hard. Maybe this is what that means, learning to open up again." He smiled, a little sad, a little hopeful. "You make it sound simple. Maybe it doesn't have to be complicated." The fire popped softly. She didn't know if it was the warmth, the tea, or the look in his eyes. But something about that moment felt like standing on the edge of something she couldn't turn away from anymore. Evan leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "You remind me of your uncle sometimes. You've got that same way of seeing people not for what they've done, but for who they still could be." Her chest tightened. "He saw that in you too, Evan. He trusted you with everything that mattered." The emotion in his eyes flickered, gratitude, sorrow, something in between. "He was the best man I ever knew. And you were his best friend." He nodded slowly. "I hope so." Claire hesitated, then whispered, "He'd want you to be happy. You know that, right?" Evan's gaze softened. "I think he'd want you to be." The room grew still. Outside, the light was fading, the lake turning from gold to silver. The hush of evening pressed against the windows, gentle and intimate. Evan stood, walking to the small table near the wall. He picked up a small wooden box and handed it to her. "I found this while finishing the cabin," he said. "It's for you." Inside was a small carving, a wooden bird with its wings spread, polished smooth. He made this, Evan said. Said it was for the day you learned what freedom really felt like. Claire blinked back tears. He always believed in me more than I did myself. Evan smiled gently. He wasn't wrong. The firelight flickered across the room. Claire looked up, meeting his eyes. There was a quiet understanding there now, not a rush of emotion, but something deeper, steadier, the kind of connection that didn't need to be spoken aloud to be real. When she finally stood to leave, the night had fallen completely. The stars shimmered over the lake like scattered glass. "Thank you for showing me this," she said softly. Evan nodded. "It wasn't just for you. I think I needed to see it finished too." She smiled. "You built more than a cabin, Evan. You built a piece of hope." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Maybe we both did." As she drove home, the reflection of the lake followed her in the rearview mirror, still, luminous, and full of memory. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. Because some stories, she realized, don't begin with thunder or grand confessions. They begin softly with a foggy morning, a quiet man, and a heart learning how to listen again. And this one wasn't over yet. The fog returned to Willow Creek 3 mornings later, not as thick as before, but soft and familiar, like a curtain drawn gently across the lake. Claire stood on the porch, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, staring at the mist that hovered over the trees. It felt like the world had come full circle. The air smelled of pine and rain, and the hum of crickets faded with the dawn. Somewhere out there, she could almost hear her uncle's voice, steady, kind, and patient, telling her that everything happens the way it's meant to. She had spent the last few days thinking about the cabin, about the warmth of that night, about Evan Haledot, and about how her heart had changed. He hadn't called or stopped by since then, but she hadn't expected him to. Evan was a man who moved carefully, who let his silence do most of the talking, yet his absence didn't feel empty. It felt like space. A quiet pause before something honest was ready to be said. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke her thoughts. She looked up. Evan's old truck peered through the mist, headlights dim, the shape of him familiar and steady. For a moment, Claire couldn't move. Then she smiled, small, uncertain, but real. He parked and stepped out, the cool morning air curling around him. "You're up early," he said, voice low, carrying easily through the fog. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "The fog feels different today." He smiled faintly. "It does. Feels like it brought something back with it." They stood quietly for a moment. The world around them was still the kind of stillness that makes everything feel sacred. "I finished the last of the work at the lake house," Evan said finally. "Thought you might want to see it one more time before I hand the keys to the realtor." Claire's brow furrowed. "You're selling it?" He nodded slowly. "Your uncle wanted it to go to someone who'd love it, or to you, if you ever decided to stay." Her heart caught on that word, stay. She looked out at the mist again. "I don't know what I want yet, but leaving feels harder than it used to." Evan's gaze softened. "That's how you know a place has your heart." They both laughed quietly, that small, nervous laughter that comes when something heavier lingers underneath. He reached into his jacket pocket, then, and pulled out a folded envelope. "Your uncle left this for you," he said. "He told me to give it to you when you were ready. I think you are now." Claire took it with trembling hands. The paper was old but carefully kept, her name written in that familiar, looping handwriting. She hesitated before opening it, as if the moment itself needed permission. "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, you've already found what I hoped you would, not answers, but a kind of peace. You've always searched for meaning in big things, cities, work, success, but life's truth hides in the quiet moments, in people who show up without needing to be asked. Evan is one of those people. You may not realize it now, but strength like his is rare. Not loud, not proud, but real. Don't run from the things that scare you just because they ask your heart to be brave. Love is not about perfection. It's about finding someone who reminds you you're already enough. Don't be afraid of him. Don't be afraid of yourself. Uncle Tom." Claire's eyes blurred as she finished reading. She pressed the letter to her chest, the weight of her uncle's love settling deep within her. When she looked up, Evan was watching her, not with pity or confusion, but with quiet understanding. He always knew what to say. She whispered. Evan nodded. He did. Claire took a deep breath. He wrote that love isn't about perfection. It's about finding someone who reminds you you're enough. Evan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a flicker of emotion that he couldn't hide. "He said that to me once too," he murmured. "After Mary died. I didn't understand it then, and now. He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Now I think I do." The wind shifted, brushing her hair against her face. Neither of them moved closer, but the air between them tightened, carrying everything they hadn't said. "Evan," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "when I came back here, I felt like I was starting over from nothing. But you've shown me that maybe starting over doesn't mean forgetting the past, it means honoring it." He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cool air. "You did that for me too, Claire. You brought something back I thought was gone." Her throat tightened. "What's that?" "Hope." The word landed softly but deeply, like a seed finding its soil. They stood in silence for a while, two people wrapped in fog, grief, and something gentler than either. The world felt smaller, but safer. Finally, Evan spoke again. "You know, I've been thinking about fixing up the old workshop by the lake, turning it into a little studio space. There's good light there, might be perfect for writing." Claire's eyes widened slightly. "You mean, for me?" He shrugged with a faint smile. "Or for whoever needs it." She laughed through the tears that had been waiting to fall. "You're still building things for everyone else." He smiled softly. "Old habits die hard." Then, after a pause, "Maybe I just like building things that last." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she understood that the quiet strength she'd admired wasn't just something he gave others. It was who he was, the kind of man who didn't speak love in words, but in every nail, every repair, every moment he showed up when no one else did. The fog began to lift again, slowly revealing the lake in the distance, still calm, glimmering in the morning light. Claire stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar on his hand, the one she remembered from childhood when he'd helped her fix her bicycle. "Maybe we could work on the studio together," she said softly. "I could write, you could build." He smiled, the corner of his mouth curving in that quiet, familiar way. "Sounds like a fair trade." For a moment, neither moved. Then, in the stillness, something shifted, not loud, not dramatic, but steady and sure. Like a door opening to a new season, Claire looked toward the horizon, where sunlight began to pierce through the last of the fog. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Evan followed her gaze. "It always was. You just needed the fog to see it." She turned to him then, her eyes soft. "Evan, yeah, I'm not going back to Chicago." He didn't seem surprised. He only nodded slowly, the faintest smile playing on his lips. "I didn't think you would." The fog thinned to a soft mist around them, and for the first time since her uncle's passing, Claire felt whole again, like all the pieces of her story had quietly come together. The porch creaked beneath their feet. The lake shimmered. The world was quiet but not empty. She looked at him once more, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for being here." Evan's eyes met hers, steady and warm. "I was never anywhere else." And in that simple truth, she found everything her heart had been searching for, not the rush of romance, not the noise of the city, but something purer, connection, belonging, peace. As the fog finally lifted, Willow Creek came alive with light again, and somewhere between the silence and the sunlight, a new beginning quietly took its first breath, because sometimes, love doesn't arrive with thunder or fanfare, it returns quietly, like fog on a familiar morning. The end.